Well, we're honing in on voting trends in the Western Cape on the Pulse tonight. Local government elections analyst Pascal Moloi joins us. Pascal, good evening to you. Thanks for being with us once again. I mean, I know it's often said in our society that the Western Cape is different in some ways to the rest of our country. That must apply politically. You do see quite significant differences between what happens in the Western Cape, what happens in the rest of the country.
No, indeed, Stephen, and once again, thank you for the invite. Yes, it is quite different. The trends are that you find that in the Western Cape, the average numbers, I know there's a dominance of the DA, but there's quite a large number of municipalities where the percentage hover between 45 and 60, and 45 and 48, where there's no outright winner between the ANC mainly and the DA. And that has caused, especially from 2016, a number of smaller parties, independent parties coming up, especially in the major centers of the 4 districts outside Cape Town. And they've brought a bit of color to the politics of the Western Cape, where you have either the ANC, well, in most cases the DA, just needing one more vote from an independent to gain power. So it has given, it has added a dimension where in the country you find the most number of independent candidates that are in government, largely in the Western Cape.
So, I mean, that's really interesting, because what you have is these coalitions that really are held together by one big party and then 1 or 2 independents. I mean, a bit like Ekurhuleni and Gauteng. I suppose that makes these coalitions easier to manage.
Yeah, I mean, Ekurhuleni is a good example. They needed one seat or so, and the AIC came to the party, and they were able to sustain it for 5 years. I'm sure there are other political dynamics there and leadership issues and whatever. But you find that a lot in the Eastern Cape, I mean in the Western Cape. Well, it's a small municipality with 7 seats, but it was 3-3 between the DA and the ANC, and a party called the CAPS of Welkele, something like that, party, COP, let me just call it COP, came in and even at some point got the mayoral seat. So you're going to see that with your Knysna independence, with your winelands and the West Coast, I think we're going to see a lot more of that coming up in the Western Cape. Cape Town is different, but you're right that the politics of the Western Cape and the voting trends seem quite different from the rest of the country.
I'm going to come to Cape Town in a minute, because as we all know, Cape Town is very different. But in terms of, so if you've got independents, and they're able to actually get quite significant political power, in the case you mentioned, become mayor, but also hold the balance of power, and then, unlike what we see in other places, where there are more parties involved in the coalition, have a successfully run coalition, this must incentivize more people to become independents. I mean, if it happens in one place, the district municipality or the municipality next door, someone's going to think, well, hold on, I can do the same thing.
Well, it will be interesting to look at the numbers of independent candidates. I think it has increased. Generally, candidates for ward councils and for ward elections have increased. But I think there's a significant number of independents. I think also it's the issue around the, let me call fewer seat or 1-seat parties. Sometimes maybe we say independent, but let's say 1-seat parties. You know, there's a very nice calculation looking at voter turnout, A, B minus what have you plus 1 to give you the number of seats, which relates directly to voter turnout, the number of votes that you get as a party, and it will determine the number of seats that you get. So the lower allocated seats parties, if I could call them that, are the ones that that 1 seat will make a difference and tilt the balance of forces within a municipality. And that has happened a lot in the Western Cape.
I'm fascinated by what's going to happen immediately after the elections, because political parties are going to try and claim they've won in different ways. So some will point to just how many votes they got as a percentage across all of the country, and they say we won based on that. Others are going to say we got control of more metros than you did, or we got control of more metros. They're going to make metros the story. And so others are going to say we won more councils than anyone else and make that the story. And the reason I bring this up is that Cape Town is really important here, because no one that I know believes that the DA will actually lose control, just like no one that I know believes that the ANC will lose control of eThekwini. It's interesting that Cape Town has become, it seems for the moment, relatively safe for the DA in this election.
Well, it is, but there will be a drop. Obviously, there will be a drop, but I don't think it will be below 50%. Unfortunately, whether it's Cape Town or Langaban or Knysna or whatever, the patterns are still, I hate to use the word, but there's still fault lines that you see in most of our towns, especially the bigger towns and the big metros. The fault lines around poverty, inequality, and race and all that, they're still there. They're still abundant. In Cape Town, I think it took another 10. That's why you have parties like the Good Party emerging, Al Jamal emerging, that there is also that racial fault line that's there. It probably has been there historically, but was held together by some nationalist sentiment, whether it's an African nationalist sentiment or it's a democratic nationalist sentiment that diluted these fault lines. It looks like we've gone back to those fault lines. When people talk and complain about service delivery, you cannot ignore that those fault lines are there. And they are there in Cape Town, they're there in Johannesburg, they're there in Ekurhuleni. In Knysna, they're there. The fires, I think, that happened in that Pito-Knysna corridor, and the responses and the damage that were caused there showed those fault lines. People were worried about their mortgages and their insurances, and other people were worried about just simple livelihood, their shacks and stuff like that. So yes, we cannot run away from those. But yeah, I think it will be quite risky for a betting person to bet otherwise in Cape Town.
Better than betting on Manchester United.
Yeah.
We have at the moment a very interesting person who's quite strong in Cape Town, well, to an extent, relatively. I'm talking about Patricia de Lille. I should talk about the Good Party, but I think we can call it Patricia de Lille. So, I mean, in a way, it's quite a professional operation. There are a lot of sound bites, etc., coming from the Good Party. But she is also in the National Cabinet. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. Plenty of people in opposition, you know, the NFP's done it, the Freedom for Plus did it. But how do you think voters see that? Do you think that Patricia de Lille, and I make no judgment on this myself, but do you think that voters actually don't like the fact that Patricia de Lille is in cabinet and won't vote for the Good Party as a result?
Maybe there might be mixed reactions to that. There might be those who say that the fact that she's in cabinet and she's perceived to be doing well in cabinet is a big plus. It makes a trump card for their local chances. But I'm sure proximity and being there and being able to get to her and engage with her, etc., would have been a big plus for, I suspect, the majority of Good Party followers. So yes, I think she had to take a decision, whether she's pushing national interests or she's pushing local good or Cape Town interests. Maybe that was a hard decision for her to take. But if I was an ordinary member of the Good Party, I would want to have proximity to her at the place that I live in, be able to go and complain about my roads, rubbish and race.
In a way, I sort of wonder if we're going to find in this election that not a lot changes on the face of it, but there are lots of signals for what's about to change. So in the Western Cape, we might find that for the first time in a while, the ANC may be getting its act together. I mean, it hasn't for a long time in the Western Cape, but the DA losing support in Cape Town. Not losing Cape Town, but losing support. The ANC, it seems, losing a little bit of support, maybe not in some of the other places around the country, but the story of the election becomes, or the signal rather of the election becomes, the growth of independents and smaller parties. We see that in a big way in Cape Town, and that what we're going to see is that this election is actually sending a signal of what's going to happen in the future.
Yes, of course. I mean, there's a big test of what's going to happen in 2024, and a lot of writers and analysts have written about it. That, well, the point, I think their point of departure, most of the writers, is that the point of departure is that coalition governments have failed in South Africa. Are they going to fail at national level? But there's a signal that we might be going that direction come 2024. But yes, the emergence of coalitions led by a coalition between a big party and independents, that's going to be a feature of the Western Cape. It might not be the feature. I mean, the other, Limpopo, I mean, if the ANC doesn't win, it will lose maybe by 52%, 62%, I mean, in some wide areas or municipal areas. But where there are very close election results, independents are going to emerge, and they will color the nature of coalition politics in the country.
Pascal Moloi, thanks for coming in again. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Independent elections.